War is a symphony of terrible sounds. The whistle of artillery, the crack of a rifle, the scream of a dive bomber. But in 1942, there was a new sound that haunted the dreams of the Allied foot soldier. It was not a bang or a whine. It was a low, guttural rumble. A rhythmic clank squeak, the sound of heavy steel links churning over earth. It was the sound of the German Panzer. To the infantryman in his foxhole, the tank was a modern-day dragon. An iron beast, immune to his bullets, that spat fire from its cannon and death from its machine guns. He was taught to fear it, to hide from it, and, if possible, to get out of its way. What was he, a man of flesh and bone, supposed to do against 30 tons of rolling steel? His standard-issue rifle was useless. His grenades, little more than firecrackers against its thick hide. The .50 caliber machine gun might, if he was lucky, chip the paint. The existing anti-tank rifles, like the British boys, were comically large, punishing to fire, and by 1942, almost completely obsolete. They could barely penetrate the armor of a light scout car, let alone a Panzer IV. Soldiers were given sticky bombs, glass jars filled with nitroglycerine, covered in adhesive. The plan was to run up to the tank, slap the bomb onto its armor, and hope you could get away before it detonated. It was a suicidal, desperate, and terrifyingly ineffective tactic. The infantryman was, for all intents and purposes, helpless. The battlefield was divided into the hunters and the hunted. And he was the prey. Then, in late 1942, a new weapon began to arrive in small numbers. It did not come with the polished wood of a Springfield rifle or the heavy, machine precision of a Browning. It arrived in a long, wooden crate, and when soldiers pulled it out, they were confused. And then, they were amused. It was a simple, hollow metal tube. 5 feet long. Painted olive drab. It had a crude wooden shoulder stock, a simple trigger, and a thin wire running along the top. It looked less like a weapon and more like a piece of industrial plumbing. The GIs, in their unique and irreverent way, looked at the contraption, thought of the bizarre musical instrument played by comedian Bob Burns, and gave it a name that stuck forever, the Bazooka. They laughed at it. They called it the Stovepipe. They called it a gas pipe. They joked that it was a last-ditch effort from the Ordnance Department, a sign that they had run out of real weapons to send. The officers who demonstrated it were met with skeptical eyes. This thing was supposed to kill a Panzer? This hollow tube? The laughter was loud in the training camps of 1942. But on the battlefields of 1943, 1944, and 1945, the laughter stopped. This stovepipe would not only change the odds for the infantryman, it would change the very nature of ground warfare. It would give the hunted teeth. And in the dense, deadly hedgerows of Normandy, a small team of American soldiers would do the impossible. They would wait, their hearts pounding against their ribs, as a 60-ton German monster, the most feared tank in the world, rumbled past. And with this simple tube, they would prove that David could, in fact, still kill Goliath. This is the story of the weapon everyone laughed at, until it became the tank's worst nightmare. The problem of the invincible tank wasn't new. In World War I, the first British land ships had rolled over German trenches, impervious to machine gun fire. But in the 25 years since, the equation had shifted. Tank armor had become thicker, engines more powerful, and cannons more lethal. But the infantryman's anti-tank tools had barely evolved. The US Army Ordnance Department knew this was a crisis. As America tooled up for war, its infantry had no viable defense against the panzers that had just conquered Europe. The solution would not come from a large corporation or a famous arms designer. It would come from two relatively unknown men at the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, Captain Leslie Skinner and Lieutenant Edward Uhl. Skinner was a visionary, an officer obsessed with an emerging technology, rockets. He believed small, man-portable rocket-propelled projectiles were the future. The problem? Rockets, at the time, were notoriously inaccurate. They were better for area bombardment than for hitting a specific target. And even if you could hit a tank, what would you hit it with? A conventional explosive, like TNT, would just splatter against the armor. You needed something that could penetrate. The answer to that problem had arrived in America in 1940 in the mind of a Swiss engineer named Henry Mohaupt. He brought with him the plans for a weapon concept known as a shaped charge or a hollow charge. The principle was both simple and revolutionary. Imagine a block of TNT. If you detonate it against a steel plate, the energy explodes in all directions. Most of it is wasted, pushing air. But if you take that same block of TNT and shape it, placing a hollow, cone-shaped liner, usually made of copper, inside it, something magical happens. When the charge detonates, the force is focused by that cone. It flashes the copper liner into a molten, high-velocity jet of metal, traveling at over 20,000 feet per second. This jet doesn't melt its way through steel, it blasted its way through, using pure, focused kinetic energy. It was a plasma jet, before the term was common. It could penetrate armor that was thicker than the diameter of the charge itself. The US Army was fascinated. They created a 60mm shaped charge grenade, the M10. It was powerful. It could punch through several inches of solid steel. But there was a problem. It was too heavy. At nearly 4 pounds, it was far too heavy to be fired from a standard rifle. They tried putting it in a spigot mortar, a device that sat on the ground, but it was clumsy and slow. The M10 grenade, the magic bullet, was a solution without a delivery system. And so, in May of 1942, a demonstration was held at Aberdeen. A group of high-ranking generals gathered to watch the Army's latest, failing attempts to launch the M10. They watched as the rifle-launch versions failed, and the spigot mortars proved awkward. In the crowd stood Lieutenant Uhl. He watched the disappointing display. Nearby, Captain Skinner's team was also on the schedule, demonstrating their, equally unimpressive, fin-stabilized rockets. Uhl had a sudden, brilliant idea. A eureka moment that would change history. As one historical account recalls, Uhl turned to his colleague. "What if," he mused, "we put that grenade on the end of one of Skinner's rockets?" But they didn't have time to modify one. Uhl looked at the M10 grenade. He looked at a practice rocket. He realized the rocket's motor was the same diameter as the grenade's body. He grabbed an inert M10 grenade head and a practice rocket, went to a workshop, and simply taped them together. Then, he saw a pile of junk metal. He found a 5-foot-long steel tube, a scrap piece from a previous project, that was just slightly wider than the 60mm rocket. It was open at both ends. He grabbed a simple grip, a trigger from a spare part, and wired it to an ignition system. This was the prototype. It was built in hours, from scrap, by 2 men who saw a connection others had missed. Later that same day, the generals were still observing tests. Uhl and Skinner, uninvited, interrupted. They set up their stovepipe on a small bipod. Downrange, a target tank waited. Uhl pulled the trigger. There was a loud whoosh and a cloud of smoke. The rocket streaked across the field and slammed into the tank. The generals were confused. They assumed it was just another inert practice round. Then, Uhl loaded a live round, a real M10-shaped charge head, taped to a live rocket motor. He fired again. The whoosh, followed by a brilliant flash and a sharp crack as the charge detonated. When the smoke cleared, there was a neat, small hole punched clean through the tank's armor. The generals were silent. They had just witnessed the impossible. One of them, Major General Gladion Barnes, head of Ordnance Research, was stunned. He reportedly said, "I have no idea what that is, but we must have it. And we must have it now." The weapon was rushed into production with the official, clumsy designation, Launcher, Rocket, 2.36-inch, M1. But to the men who would soon use it, it would only ever beat the bazooka. The bazooka was a miracle weapon. A game-changer. And like many miracle weapons, it was rushed into the hands of soldiers with almost no training, no doctrine, and a host of undiscovered flaws. The first 5,000 launchers and 25,000 rockets were sent with all urgency to the American forces preparing for Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa, in November 1942. When the troops uncrated them, the laughing began. The M1 Bazooka was a mess of contradictions. It was brilliant in concept, but clumsy in execution. Its first, and most significant, flaw was its ignition system. To fire the rocket, the launcher used two large, heavy batteries hidden inside the wooden shoulder stock. When the gunner pulled the trigger, it completed a circuit, sending an electric charge down a wire to ignite the rocket motor. It worked, sometimes. In the clean, dry, warm air of the Aberdeen proving ground, it worked beautifully. But in the cold, damp, miserable nights of the Tunisian winter, the batteries would grow weak. The contacts would corrode. A GI in the 3rd Infantry Division later recalled the experience. "We'll call him Corporal Jensen. We were dug in outside of. I don't even remember the name. Just another patch of mud. We heard M coming at dawn. Panzers. Maybe 3 or 4. My sergeant shoves the bazooka at me. Jensen, you're up. I'd trained on it for about an hour. I load the rocket. I see the first one, a Panzer III, clanking up the road. I put the sight on it, wait, and pull the trigger. Nothing. Just a dead click. I check the wire. I pull the trigger again. Click. The Sarge is screaming at me. The loader, he's slapping a new rocket in, thinking the first was a dud. I pull the trigger. Click. The batteries were dead. Frozen. Useless. That Panzer rolled right up to our line and just sat there, firing its machine gun into every ditch. We were back to being prey. I threw the damn stovepipe down and grabbed my rifle. This was not an isolated incident. The unreliability of the battery system was a plague. The second, and more spectacular, flaw was the backblast. The bazooka was, essentially, a recoilless rocket. It didn't kick like a rifle because all the propulsive gas was vented out the open back end. This created a massive plume of smoke, dust, and fire, stretching 15 to 20 feet behind the gunner. The Army, in its haste, had barely mentioned this. The backblast was a tactical nightmare. First, it was a giant shoot 'em eat sign. The instant a bazooka team fired, every German machine gunner, rifleman, and tank commander within 500 yards knew exactly where they were. The team had to fire and move immediately, or they would be cut to ribbons. Second, it was lethally dangerous to the team itself. If the loader wasn't careful, he could be severely burned. If the gunner fired with his back too close to a wall, a building, or even a dense mound of earth, the blast cone would reflect back, engulfing the crew in a fireball. In the urban fighting in Tunisia, squads learned this the hard way. Firing from inside a small room was a death sentence. And finally, there was the rocket itself. The M6 rocket was a marvel against 1940 armor. But by late 1942, German tank armor, particularly the frontal armor of the Panzer IV, had been up-armored. The M6-shaped charge just wasn't powerful enough. Soldiers, untrained, would fire from 300, 400 yards away. The rocket was wildly inaccurate at that range. And if they hit, they would aim for the center mass, the thickest frontal plate. The result? The rocket would detonate, harmlessly, against the front of the tank. The German crew, alerted to the threat, would simply traverse their turret and erase the bazooka team. That Stovepipe was gaining a reputation as a dud. A weapon that got you killed. But something interesting was happening. While many American GIs were losing faith in the weapon, the Germans were not. In early 1943, on the Tunisian front, the Wehrmacht captured a handful of the new American M1 bazookas and their M6 ammunition. The German Ordnance Department, unlike the skeptical GIs, was horrified. They immediately saw what the Americans had built, a cheap, mass-producible, infantry-held weapon that used the revolutionary-shaped charge principle. They recognized the genius of the design and its flaws. Within months, German engineers had reverse-engineered it. They took the American concept, fixed its most glaring problems, and scaled it up. They ditched the unreliable battery ignition, replacing it with a simple, robust, percussion cap firing mechanism. They increased the warhead size from 60mm to 88mm, giving it far more penetration. And they added a metal blast shield to protect the gunner's face. They called it the Raketenpanzer Buxi 54. But the German soldiers gave it a more terrifying name, the Panzerschreck. Tank terror. It is one of the great ironies of the war. The Germans built a better bazooka, faster than the Americans could fix their own. The success of the Panzerschreck on the Eastern Front, in turn, terrified the Soviets, who had also captured some M1s and dismissed them as ineffective. The Germans, it seemed, respected that stovepipe far more than the men who were issued it. But that was about to change. The US Army was learning. The feedback from North Africa was brutal, but it was clear. The concept was sound. The execution was flawed. Ordnance engineers at Aberdeen scrambled. They had to fix the weapon. And they had to do it fast. First, they tackled the most hated feature, the battery. They ripped it out completely. In its place, they designed a simple, trigger-operated magneto. When the gunner squeezed the trigger, a spring-loaded hammer struck a percussion pin, which in turn generated a small electrical spark, just like the flint on a lighter. This spark ignited the rocket. It was simple. It was all-weather. It had no batteries to die, no wires to corrode. The new model was designated the M1A1. It was a massive improvement. But the designers didn't stop there. They recognized the M1 was long and clumsy. For paratroopers, or for men fighting in tight European towns, it was an obstacle. This led to the M9. The M9 was the perfected bazooka. It could be broken down into two smaller, lighter pieces, making it infinitely easier to carry. It replaced the crude wooden stock with a lighter, skeletonized metal one. It had a new, improved optical sight, replacing the basic iron peep sight. And, most importantly, it came with a new bullet. The engineers had been hard at work improving the shaped charge. The new rocket, the M6A3, was a masterpiece of destructive physics. The copper cone was redesigned, the explosive filler was more powerful, and its fins were improved for better accuracy. This new round could reliably penetrate for inches of solid steel armor. While the M1's rocket might annoy a Panzer, the M9's rocket could kill it. But a better weapon was only half the equation. The army had to change the man, not just the gun. A massive new training doctrine was rolled out. Soldiers were no longer just handed the tube and told to point it at the tank. They were taught how to hunt. They were organized into two-man hunter-killer teams. A gunner, who carried the launcher, and a loader, who carried the rockets in a canvas bag. They were taught that they were not riflemen. They were not artillery. They were ambush predators. The lessons were drilled into them. Lesson 1. Get close. The bazooka was a 100-yard weapon. Not 300. Not 500. 100 yards. Preferably 50. This required a level of courage that is difficult to comprehend. It meant letting the tank come to you. Lesson 2. Aim for the flanks. Never, ever shoot at the thick, sloped frontal armor. That was a sucker's shot. You were taught to aim for the flat, thinner side armor. For the rear. For the engine compartment. Lesson 3. Cripple, then kill. A tank is only a monster if it can move. The first shot, they were taught, should be at the mobility group. Aim for the tracks. Aim for the drive sprocket. A tank that has thrown a track is no longer a tank. It's a pillbox. A stationary, vulnerable, steel coffin. Once it was stopped, the team could reposition and fire a second, killing shot into its side or rear. Lesson 4. Fire and move. The backblast was still a fact of life. Fire and forget wasn't the motto. It was fire and get the hell out. The loader was trained to tap the gunner on the helmet as soon as the rocket was clear, the signal to move. That stovepipe was no longer a joke. It was a respected, lethal tool. And in the brutal, grinding campaign up the spine of Italy, the bazooka teams proved their worth. In the narrow, winding mountain roads and the rubble-choked streets of Italian villages, the Panzer was vulnerable. A German tank commander, captured in 1943 near Salerno, expressed his newfound respect. In Poland, in France, we were gods. The infantry ran. Here, in Italy, the infantry hunts us. We move around a corner, and from a window, whoosh. We move past a destroyed building, whoosh. Every pile of rocks, every window, every ditch, it holds this new terror. This Panzerfaust, no, this Ofenrohr, stovepipe, it has given the American soldier a sting. The tide was turning. The equalizer was in the hands of the infantry. But the greatest test, for both the men and their weapon, was yet to come. Because Germany was not sitting idle. They, too, were building a new weapon. A new monster. And it was immune to the bazooka. Or so they thought. June 1944. Normandy. The Allies have stormed the beaches and are now fighting for every foot of ground in the dense, claustrophobic nightmare known as the Bocage. The Bocage was a landscape of small fields, separated by ancient, thick hedgerows, massive, 10-foot-high earthen banks, topped with dense bushes and trees. It was a maze. It was a natural fortress. And it was the perfect hunting ground for a new German predator, the Panzer VI. The Tiger. The Tiger was a psychological weapon as much as a steel one. It weighed 54 tons. Its frontal armor was 100 millimeters thick, for inches of high-quality, rolled steel. Its main gun, the legendary 88 millimeters, could destroy an American Sherman tank from over a mile away, long before the Sherman was even in range to fight back. When a Tiger appeared, the American advance ground to a halt. And for the bazooka teams, it was a terrifying new equation. Their new M6A3 rocket could penetrate for inches of steel. The Tiger's frontal armor was for inches of steel. But it was sloped, making it effectively much thicker. The M9 bazooka, the equalizer, was useless against the front of a Tiger. A direct hit would simply shatter. The word spread among the GIs, if it's a Tiger, don't even bother. Just run. Once again, the infantryman was helpless. Imagine you are a private in the 29th Infantry Division, 2 weeks after D-Day. We'll call you Miller. You are exhausted. You haven't slept in 48 hours. You are dug in along a hedgerow just outside St. Lo. It is quiet. Too quiet. Then you hear it. The heavy clank and rumble that sounds bigger than the Panzer IVs you've been fighting. Your sergeant peers through his binoculars. His face goes white. Tiger, he whispers. The word falls like a stone. It's a lone. A lone scout, perhaps, or one that got separated. It's coming down the narrow, sunken dirt road that runs parallel to your hedgerow. Your riflemen check their M1s, a useless gesture. The bar gunner grips his weapon, knowing it's just as pointless. Your squad Sherman support is miles behind, held up by a destroyed bridge. You are a bazooka gunner. You are carrying the M9, broken down in its bag. Your loader, a kid from Ohio named Baker, is carrying 6 M6A3 rockets. Miller, the sergeant says. Can you do it? You look at Baker. He's pale. You're both thinking the same thing. It's a Tiger. From the front, Sarge? No chance. It's not gonna be from the front, the sergeant says, his voice strained. He's on the road. He's gonna pass us. He doesn't know we're here. This is the Bocage. The road is sunken. Your hedgerow is above it. The Tiger will pass not 50 yards away. Below you. But to get a shot, you have to let it pass. You have to wait, in total silence, while 54 tons of steel and death grinds by, completely ignorant of your existence. If a single man coughs, if a single piece of equipment clinks, the Tiger's turret will turn. And its coaxial milligram 42 will turn your entire squad into red mist. Set it up, the sergeant orders. You and Baker crawl to a small break in the hedgerow. You assemble the M9. Your hands are shaking so badly, you can barely connect the two halves of the tube. Baker unwraps the first rocket. He fumbles with the pin. "Easy, Baker," you whisper. The clanking is louder now. You can feel the vibration in the ground. It's a physical, pulsing thump in your chest. You shoulder the launcher. You look through the optical sight. All you see is a wall of green leaves. Wait for it, the sergeant breathes. The sound is deafening now. A mechanical roar. You can smell its exhaust, hot metal and diesel fumes. And then, it appears. A colossal wall of dark, patterned steel slides past the opening in the leaves. It's so big. You see the spare tracks mounted on the turret, the thick, overlapping road wheels. It's moving slowly, cautiously. "Let it pass, let it pass." The sergeant whispers. The turret goes by. The main body of the tank. Now. The back end of the Tiger is in your sights. The rear plate. The thinnest armor on the entire beast. It's only 80 millimeters thick. Your rocket can punch that. If you hit it. If the rocket doesn't hit a bush. If the tank commander isn't looking. Now, Miller. Now. You don't aim for the center. You aim for the engine. You aim for the spot where the fuel and oil live. You pull the trigger. Whoosh. The backblast rips through the hedgerow, showering your squad with dirt and leaves. The rocket, a red streak, is gone. For one agonizing, eternal second, nothing. The rocket slams into the Tiger's rear plate with a sharp clang crack. The effect is not like in a movie. There is no giant fireball. Instead, the Tiger just stops. It slews to the side, one track locking up. A thick, oily, black smoke begins to pour from the engine grills you were aiming for. Inside the tank, your heat round has done its job. The molten copper jet has punched through the 80 mm plate as if it were cardboard. It has ripped through the engine compartment, severing fuel lines, shattering the transmission, and turning the inside of the rear hull into a superheated inferno. The German crew knows, instantly, that they're dead. A clank, the commander's hatch flies open. A man in a black uniform, his headset still on, tumbles out, beating at his smoldering sleeve. Another man, then another, bailing out of the front hatches, falling to the road. The tank is silent. It's dead. A 15-pound stovepipe has just killed a 54-ton Tiger. Your squad is silent. You can't believe it. You are shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline. Baker just looks at you and gives a weak, terrified smile. You didn't just kill a tank. You killed a myth. The story of Miller and Baker is a composite, built from the after-action reports and memoirs of a dozen different infantry squads in the summer of 1944. Did a bazooka kill a Tiger? The answer is an emphatic yes. It was not a common occurrence. It required near-suicidal courage. It required perfect positioning. It required an almost golden shot into the thinnest rear or side armor. But it happened. And more importantly, the threat of it happening changed tank warfare forever. Remember the Panzerschreck? The Germans' bigger, better bazooka? By 1944, they were being used by the thousands on the eastern and western fronts, causing catastrophic losses for Allied and Soviet armor. The Germans, ironically, became the masters of the weapon they had copied. But the bazooka and its German children had a ripple effect that no one could have predicted. Tank designers were suddenly faced with a new, terrifying reality: every enemy infantry squad was now a potential tank killer. How do you protect a tank from a shaped charge? Making the armor thicker didn't always work. The heat jet didn't care how thick the armor was, only if it could focus. The Germans, in their desperate ingenuity, found the answer. They started welding thin metal plates, or skirts, onto the sides of their Panzer IVs and Stugs. The Allies called them Scherzen. They looked flimsy. And they were. But they weren't designed to stop the rocket. They were designed to detonate it early. When a bazooka rocket hit this thin, outer spaced armor, the shaped charge would detonate 5 feet away from the real armor. By the time the molten jet crossed the gap, it would have dispersed, losing its focus and its penetrating power. It would just splatter. Look at any late-war German tank. Those skirts are a direct, physical tribute to the terror of the bazooka. Look at modern tanks. The slat armor you see on a striker, or the cage armor on a British Warrior, it is the exact same principle as those Scherzen. It is the legacy of the stovepipe. By the end of the war, over 475,000 bazookas of all models had been produced. They were used on every front, by every Allied nation. They were used to hunt tanks in Normandy. They were used to blast Japanese bunkers on Iwo Jima. They were even strapped to the wings of L for Cub planes, creating the world's first attack helicopters, as Major Charles Bazooka Charlie Carpenter terrorized German armor from the sky. The weapon was not perfect. It was often flawed. It was terrifying to use. It demanded a new kind of bravery from the men who wielded it. But it answered the most desperate question of the war. What can a man do against a tank? The M1 bazooka, that stovepipe that soldiers laughed at, gave them the answer. It was a weapon that shifted the balance of power on the battlefield, away from the machine and back to the man. It proved that no monster, no matter how thick its armor or how powerful its gun, was truly invincible. It proved that even a 60-ton dragon could be slain by two men with a hollow metal tube.